All right, Robby, what's on your radar today?
So the World Economic Forum's annual meeting is underway in Davos, Switzerland. Now, last year, disinformation stole the spotlight and was featured as a key problem for global elites to address. This year, the WEF has upped the ante, releasing a report that lists misinformation and disinformation as the #1 short-term risk facing the world, beating out interstate armed conflict, climate change, and lack of economic opportunity. Societal polarization, which is closely linked to misinfo, disinfo, came in third. Now, one of the first events at this year's meeting was a panel discussion called Liberating Science, which largely focused on disinformation as it relates to the climate change agenda. Now, a few short clips from the session went viral on social media. X-users took particular note of comments made by two panelists, Naomi Oreskes, a historian of science at Harvard, and Luciana Vaccaro, a Swiss scientist, who both objected to the increased toxicity of the site since Elon Musk took over. Vaccaro said that a fundamental issue with X was, quote, the policy of the owner, which is problematic. Let's watch.
For a long time, I was on Twitter. And now it's become such a toxic place that I've concluded it's not a worthwhile place to spend time. And as you've said, it is exhausting. So you do have to pick and choose. And you have to think about where the places where you can get your message across. I am trying to figure out, I mean, I have given up on X, what a scary name that even is, right? And I don't know what the alternative is right now.
Of course, on X, now there is also the policy of the owner that is problematic.
Now, one can certainly find fault with the various ways in which Musk is running the site, though Vaccaro seemed to me to be criticizing his stated commitment to allowing more freedom of expression on the platform. Short video clips can be misleading, however. Thankfully, the World Economic Forum records nearly all of its events and panel discussions. And so last night I went into their website, I tracked it down, and I found the full discussion, and I watched it. And here are a few impressions I formed. First, the participants frequently described science as something approaching a catechism. They were broadly concerned about declining trust in scientific institutions and expressed hope that scientists would train themselves to become better communicators of what is and is not scientific truth. One of the panelists, Carlos Afonso Nobre, a researcher at the University of Sao Paulo, was positively apoplectic about the phenomenon of populist backlash against expertise and elitism around the world. He said, quote, why is populism increasing? I don't understand. They are all anti-science. Why in democracies are we electing anti-science politicians? And he was talking about populists on the right and the left. He said that specifically. Now, the panelists were totally unable to answer that question he posed. Why is this happening? Offering unconvincing explanations, such as misinformation is easier to obtain than true information, technology makes everything more complicated, the news spreads too fast in today's world, yada, yada, yada. All of those excuses we hear over and over again. Harvard's Oreskes, who chimed in more frequently than the other panelists, correctly noted that distrust of expertise is hardly a new development, but said that the pandemic had exacerbated it. Quote, in the last 10 to 20 years, she said, there's been a deliberate attempt to inflame the public against experts. We definitely saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, at no point during the hour-long discussion did any of the panel experts ever explore the idea that perhaps some of the backlash against the science stemmed from pandemic-era policy mistakes made by governments at the behest of health advisors. They correctly noted that scientists are only human and must be allowed to propose ideas, then later correct their theories based on new information, but they utterly failed to grapple with the lived experience of skeptics during the COVID pandemic. People who disagreed with the underlying science, whether masks, lockdown, school closures, and vaccination worked to substantially reduce the spread of the virus, for instance, or even people who merely disputed the policy implications of that science, like whether mandating masks, lockdown, schools closures, and vaccines was justified or were trade-offs. They were accused of spreading misinformation and in some cases, many cases, barred from speaking about it on social media. At every turn, the loudest voices calling for more suppression of dissent relating to COVID-19 were government health advisors and their allies in the media and at nonprofit organizations purporting to specialize in fighting misinfo and disinfo. In the U.S., this included numerous government agencies that worked in tandem to force censorship on social media companies, as well as purported experts who demonized legitimate lines of inquiry, including whether COVID-19 could have emerged from a lab, as racist conspiracy theories. That's what the New York Times lead coronavirus reporter said. The anti-science backlash is not a backlash against the obvious truth that the consensus on specific questions evolved over the course of the pandemic. For instance, I don't think we should find fault with scientists who recommended cloth masks based on available evidence, and then later admitted that cloth masks were, quote, little more than facial decorations. But we should be allowed to express consternation that the choice to wear a mask or not was frequently overridden by government actors at the behest of public health officials, and we should be outraged that the anti-misinformation crowd actively tried to prohibit scrutiny of these policies. During her remarks, panelist Vaccaro was correct in pointing out that science is not democratic. At the end, there is one truth, she said. The scientists don't vote. That is, of course, true. But in a democracy, the people do in fact vote on what the government is supposed to do with the information provided by the scientists. Too many members of Team Science overreached by trying to control the policy and the messaging, even when they were wrong. So I watched this entire panel. These are smart people making interesting observations about the trajectory of the political reality across the globe, not just in the U.S., in Europe, and other places, this populist backlash. And they had very little explanation for why. Over and over again, like, scientists need to be better communicators. We make things too confusing for everyone. But there was just, I found it so telling that there was no acknowledgement. And it was the same case last year when they did this kind of similar panel with Brian Stelter leading it, about how no one is saying, or they shouldn't be saying, I'm sure some people are saying, I'm not saying scientists can never make mistakes, or if they change their mind, they have a theory, doesn't work, they change their mind, then we shouldn't condemn them. I'm not saying that. But they did stigmatize, or their allies in the media stigmatized, people who were skeptical of what they said, and now they look very foolish when they change their mind.
Yeah, I think the real drilling down to the core of it here is not that people's concerns about whether Twitter is, in fact, a free speech platform are legitimate. I think those are very legitimate concerns. People like myself who were critical of Twitter from the left continue to be critical of it under Elon Musk, given that we've seen so many instances of censorship, whether it was the Elon Jets fiasco, whether it's something I mentioned in my radar yesterday, where it's putting a warning on major Israeli newspaper outlet Ynet's reporting about the Hannibal Doctrine, whether it's reporting that Musk has acceded to like 88% of all takedown requests since he took over Twitter, as compared to 50% in the earlier days. I think all of those are very legitimate concerns, and I'd like to know what extent of the criticism of X made on that panel was about those kinds of things. But I also really take your point that I think the confusion that they articulate is about being completely unwilling to admit that sometimes the experts got it wrong. And I don't think, I agree with you, the crime is not getting it wrong. The crime is gaslighting the public, that when they see the flip-flopping opinions and the flip-flopping advice that you're getting out of the experts, that it's rational and reasonable to want to do your own research, or to reserve judgment, or to maybe hang back a little bit before taking some advised medical direction, if you can do so safely. If you're not, for example, if you're someone like myself who lived alone during COVID and didn't need necessarily to hop back into the public and immediately be first in line for some of the recommended medical interventions, that's the problem. And I do think that people are still afraid that admitting that they were wrong means that they don't have any more authority to weigh in from a scientific perspective. And they need to get over that, especially someone who's a history of science professor. I was a history of science major at Harvard, and so much of what we learned about is the fallibility of science. She should know better.
Right, exactly. Over time, I mean, they were leeching people to make people better until the 20th century, and we've caught these people. We played that video the other day of Fauci saying, "What? I never put my thumb on the scale. Lab leak versus natural origins. I never preferred it one way." And then you can play 20 clips of him saying, "I substantially favor one or the other." And again, that's fine. He can change his mind, but they did encourage social media companies and independent people who had some expertise who disagreed. They shut them out of public life to the best of their abilities, and that is what we're really upset about.
I would say, though, that feels so explicitly political, Fauci was a political figure,
Yeah.
not a kind of scientist sitting in a lab just pontificating about what he thinks is right based on scientific judgment. And again, I do think it would help these panelists to disaggregate someone like Fauci, who's not just making mistakes, but increasingly it looks like was making decisions based on a desired political outcome,
Yes.
not the science. To say, well, that wasn't science. Don't blame science. Fauci was wrong, not because we shouldn't protect Fauci with trust the science. It wasn't the science that messed up. It was that Fauci, knowing that there was a diversity of opinion about things, knowing
Right.
that there was credibility to say lab leak, chose to push a different narrative to advance what for some reason became a liberal policy agenda to deny lab leak.
Possibly to shield himself and the people who agree with
Sure.
his, but from oversight
An
on the funding
institutional,
issue.
protecting a kind of
Institutional protection, right. Yeah.
institutionalist perspective, yeah.
Well, if you liked this radar, I just wanted to let you know that I am launching a new newsletter for Reason. You can go to my Twitter page. I just have a tweet up about it. You can subscribe down there. It'll be a lot of my radars, a lot of the same things I like to talk about on the show, maybe some additional TV and video game and Dungeons and Dragons recommendations. I know some people in the audience appreciate that. I see it in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you feel like it, and we'll have more Rising right after this.